so I will get started. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to read a little bit off my screen because I don't want to mess anything up. My name is Tanya Rand. I'm from White Hots. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, which is called Kanata Classics, a new collection on Canadian literature for today's library collections. We're thrilled to have Stephanie Sinclair with us. Stephanie is a publisher at McClelland Stewart, an imprint of Penguin Random House Canada. Today, Stephanie will introduce Kanata Classics, which is a new groundbreaking collection that champions brilliant, timeless books. The series brings together Indigenous and non-Indigenous voices in thoughtful dialogue, bridging generations and cultures and exploring powerful themes of belonging and resilience. These beautifully curated editions invite readers and libraries to discover Canada's literary legacy in a fresh and meaningful way. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie Sinclair.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to be talking to all of you and to be talking about Kanata. I thought I would start by just telling you a little bit more about myself and the context for what brings me into this space in the first place. I am Cree and Ojibwe and German Jewish on my mom's side, and my sisters and I grew up in downtown Toronto in a very um, you know settler lifestyle. We didn't have access to culture or language, and community. It felt really far out of reach. My dad was on the board for Native Child and Family Services, but outside of that, we just did not embrace our indigeneity in any way, shape, or form. My maternal grandmother lived with us, and she was a Holocaust survivor. And in 1992, I believe, she was invited to do Tales of the Shoah, which was the Steven Spielberg funded giant oral history project where they sent oral historians into the living rooms of hundreds of, if not thousands, of Holocaust survivors so they could tell their stories. And my sisters and I think I was 10, my older sister was 12, and my younger sister was 6. And we sat with her for 2 days and listened to her tell her story. I mean, both her the German fairy tales that she grew up with and the food and music and things that she loved about Germany through to her traumas around the war. We learned about her high school sweetheart. His name was Walter. She blushed, she giggled. It was delightful. And after that, it became clear that she had new space to tell her story and to open herself up entirely because she'd been given the space to have testimony and to be heard. Whereas on my dad's side, that had never happened. It wasn't until the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that there was any invitation for Indigenous people and Indigenous survivors to actually get their stories on record. And even then, so many people didn't have that opportunity, and so many of those records are now sealed in Ottawa. So I found myself sort of haunted by this in my 20s while I was always interested in storytelling in one way or another, but I don't think I'd considered publishing as actually an industry that existed. I loved books. I grew up in the stacks of the Palmerston Library in Toronto. It truly was a home away from home. But I really didn't know how to get into publishing. And then I found myself doing a writing program where I wrote absolutely nothing and spent the entire time editing and talking to other writers about their work. So it was really clear to me that, okay, there's something here. So I found a publishing program and found my entry point into publishing, which was at an agency. And it was there that I spent a couple of years really trying to be like other people in publishing and be a generalist, and failed and could not sell anything for the life of me. And then only I remember there being a moment where I was like, okay, I need to finally just be myself and build something that feels like it really matters to me. And I knew from having grown up eating books for breakfast, lunch, and dinner that I needed to contribute to sort of changing the access to some of the stories that I didn't get the gift of growing up with. And so I decided then and there that I really wanted to curate my list as an agent with Indigenous voices and Indigenous storytelling. And so I set off to work, and it was very slow. Initially, it was really hard to find anybody who wanted to work with me, who trusted traditional publishing. And then there was one very, very generous, absolutely brilliant author named Tracy Lindbergh who wrote Birdie, which was a giant success 15 years ago now, 16 years ago. And Tracy and I had a really good very open conversation about how hard it was to find Indigenous voices in publishing and to marry some of the micro presses and the work that they were doing into more traditional publishing. And Tracy then introduced me to Billy Ray Belcourt, who was that relationship continues to be kind of transformational for me. So Billy Ray and I started working together when he was 18, before he won the Griffin. And through that relationship, I then had the gift of having his trust, and he introduced me to Joshua Whitehead. And then Alicia Elliott came on board, and then Helen Knott and Jessica Johns. And then, of course, my cousins saw that I was starting to find some success. So Murray at that point was like, "Well, maybe I'll let you represent me." But then I thought, okay, I'm kidding. He wasn't like that. He was very gracious about it. Oh, so the list just grew and grew, and it became it's still something that I'm incredibly proud of, and like it did kind of change the landscape in Canada. So I felt really conflicted almost 3 years ago when I got recruited to take this post here at McClelland Stewart, because I felt like I was going to have to dismantle this client list that formed for me my first Indigenous community. Because my family's from Peguis, but I didn't have access to that land or to those traditions. We're Anishinaabe, but I've never been to the lodge. And so it was in my conversations with Josh Whitehead and in my conversations with Alicia that I actually started to understand my own relationship with my own indigeneity and the responsibility that I feel to be contributing to the wider landscape. So when I got offered this post, there was the conflict of taking down the list, but then knowing I might have the opportunity to build something that could, in fact, take up more space in the landscape than my client list ever could. So I took the job, and within, a few months of really keeping my head down and trying to learn what on earth I was supposed to be doing, I'm still learning and trying to learn what on earth I'm supposed to be doing. I started to talk to some colleagues about the possibility of Kanata, which at the time I had wanted to call Bindigan, which in Ojibwe means come on in, or like you're welcome here.
Okay.
Um, and to me, that's still like the essence of what I hope the series can do, in fact, is to break down some of the silos between what we identify as Indigenous literature versus Canadian literature. And
Right.
that, in fact, these these books, not all of them, but some of them belong on the same shelf and deserve the same reading guides and deserve the same conversations around them. And there have been so many Indigenous classics, Indigenous masterpieces that have been completely neglected by the market. And now that we do see this level of attention and investment in Indigenous literatures, it feels to me like the right time to be pulling those books out of the backlist and say, hey, this was published in 1968. We missed it, but let's try again. Now that we know we have an audience, we have readers who want to have conversations about these books, who want to learn more about, how we got here. And so for me, that is the gift that is Kanata. And I definitely wanted before, before Murray got sick and before he passed, I talked to him a lot about it and really wanting it to be directly tied to the anniversary of the TRC.
Mhm.
Because that is on December 10th. It's the 10th anniversary of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We've only, addressed 14 of the calls to action, and many of them are, in fact, quite attainable. And so when I think about storytelling and publishing, there are so many generous publishers and generous readers and generous librarians and teachers who are working really hard to create those spaces to have conversations around these narratives. And I just want to be helping to make the titles that people can talk about more visible. Um, so
And
that's
we appreciate that. I have to say, we actually appreciate that. It's something that I think all libraries and all librarians are looking to do as well.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm really glad to hear
Yes.
that. And I'm trying to, this is the first year. So 2025 is the first year, and we've launched with these 6 books right here, beautifully designed by our in-house colleague Kelly Hill. So for me, starting, this was the first title that I felt was absolutely essential for the Canadian landscape. And Jordan does sort of specify Indigenous lit versus Canadian lit, but I do think that this was a book that 15 years ago would have been incredibly hard to publish in a corporate publishing environment. but McClelland and Stewart published it, and Indigo got really behind it because I think it did reach people in a new way. And it explored a very different narrative about what it's like to be an urban Indigenous person and to grapple with the question, like like me, if I grew up away from ceremony, away from culture, am I Indigenous enough to participate in this dialogue? And so I feel like this is a book that's going to be essential for urban Indigenous people, for younger Indigenous people who are really grappling with those fundamental questions around identity,
Yeah.
um, and also building community. And I just think it's an extraordinary book. So this was the first one. And then, of course, Maria Campbell's Half-Breed, which was, a seminal text that MNS published, um, you know, controversially, having censored Maria, they took out the page of her assault by the RCMP. And then Jared Bland, my predecessor, republished the book in 2019 and reinserted those pages, which was, hugely important. And the book is still taught everywhere, but there's a huge audience for it that hasn't yet been discovered. And we wanted to change the jacket from the half-breed cover is a younger Maria looking very sort of serious and betrayed, which she was, but she's now in her 80s. She teaches at the Indigenous University in Saskatoon. She's a mentor, she's an elder. Um, and this is her Christy Belcourt portrait. So it just speaks to perseverance and survival. And for me, that's one of the most important things is to marry some of these narratives to say, yes, we have persevered, yes, we've endured, and we also have joy and pride and celebration and community. And so my hope too, by putting these books together, is that we can help celebrate that.
Right.
Even if there's hard content, that we can in fact look at who Maria is now and say, like, wow, what an extraordinary woman.
Right.
Like I had the gift of going to Saskatoon to talk to her about the series. She brought out her storyteller box and told me stories about her upbringing and her trap line, and it was just absolutely unbelievable. And I think it is like when I think about this reaching new readers, they have the opportunity to learn so much more, not just about Canadian history, but about how proud someone can be to contribute to a wider community. And that I feel like is also hugely important. And then, of course, one of my favorite books of all time, Medicine Walk, Richard Wagamese, who, I mean, Wagamese is an extraordinary storyteller. And Medicine Walk, I think, really beautifully explores, of course, that like familial relationship between father and son and identity. But for me, the connection between all the Indigenous titles and the non-Indigenous titles on the inaugural list is land. And that they're all like very, very influenced by place and environment and the things that are around where the narrators live. Which brings me to there. An early feminist text published way ahead of its time, so much about land and understanding where we live, and then of course also feminist, which is for me, another deeply important aspect of the series is that we are in fact pushing those boundaries forward the whole time. Uh, and then I wanted different representation from the East, so we included Alistair MacLeod, and a short story collection. Brilliant, brilliant Cape Breton writer. And I should say too, like Kate Beaton wrote the introduction for Island, and
Right.
it's absolutely stunning. And then just to circle back to the intros, Claire Cameron did Bear. David A. Robertson, a good friend of the libraries, did
Yes.
Medicine Walk, and David Cheriandy did Nishka. And then Rue is the final year one title, which I think speaks so beautifully to the refugee experience and like spare, absolutely stunning prose. Uh, and so for me, it was really about trying to find titles that spoke to how complicated it is to be a Canadian, that there's so many different ways to be a Canadian, so many different ways to interact with the land and with each other and with the places we call home or with the places we're looking for. And that's for me what the series is trying to do.
Love it. That's
So
really good. I like that you touched on the main theme throughout the books because that was kind of one of the questions that I had was like, how did you decide? Like, how were you, okay, this book over this book? But now it kind of makes sense that there's a common theme. There's there's the land is kind of where you started, which is a great place to start. I mean, what a wonderful way to create a series that way.
Yeah. And I wouldn't, I mean, I definitely would not have predicted the current political climate and would not have
Yeah.
known that this is what we were publishing into. But like when we were getting close to press in the spring and there was all the, 51st state talk. And of course, these are all printed in Canada, to be clear.
Yes. Good
Yeah.
to
But I
know.
like rushed to production and asked them to put on the back made in Kanata. Because to
Perfect.
me, it also feels like even by it was Nigan who renamed the series or who came up with this suggestion, which I thought was brilliant because Kanata, in fact, means a village. And it is that like gathering of voices and contributors and community that feels so deeply important to me, and that I feel a huge responsibility to hold that space and to be contributing to that space as a publisher.
And what brought you to making the collection part Indigenous, part non-Indigenous? Like what brought you to that?
There was some pushback about that. I mean, some of the initial conversations, people were like, "Why wouldn't you just start an Indigenous series?"
Right,
Um, but for me, thinking about Murray again, and sort of the act for the path forward for me, it can't exclude anybody. Uh,
right,
and I think that some certainly like Kim Tui's voice and Marian Engel's voice and Bear, like those, I think it would be a shame not to have them resurfaced alongside Nishka, because I think it's a real shame that we do silo how we identify these books by creating separate spaces for them when in fact they can so easily be in conversation with each other if we just create that space for them. Uh,
yes, I totally agree. Yeah,
so it
you're
felt
right.
like
And it's creating the space, but also letting people discover, right? Discover not just the series, but either rediscover or discover the books once again, which is beautiful. I think it's wonderful.
thank you. Yeah, to me it feels like a beautiful thing, that
Agree.
we can do this. We can build this, we can celebrate it. And that is reconciliation. That is
Right,
the path forward, is that when we do work together, hand in hand, and take those steps forward together. And that I couldn't do that if it was just an Indigenous series. Um,
right,
yeah. So that was for me why it was essential. And the scope, I mean, next year it widens a little bit because we've got Omar Alakad's American War joining the series. And so that, I mean, he doesn't actually specifically name where it is, but it doesn't at this point because of the dystopic nature of it and given everything that's happening in the world, it could be anywhere in Canada in the future as well. It's scary to think, but it could be.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
so when you continue building the collection, will it be one book at a time, or will it be that every year you're introducing six new books to the collection?
every year there'll be six.
Okay,
Every
that's
and
wonderful.
yeah, and every year it will be three Indigenous, three non-Indigenous, and they will all publish in July. And they will all be like really beautifully designed. And part of what I thought was really important too, when we're digging up deep backlist titles, when I'm trying to engage newer readers, was to think about contemporary writers who could help frame that book.
Right.
Which is why like having Claire Cameron do the Bear introduction felt so essential. So next year, like Acai TB is doing the introduction for Omar. And Audrey Simpson is doing the introduction for Billy Ray. So really sort of thinking about people who can frame the books as why they are kind of essential for this kind of landscape.
I like that. How do you see them working in libraries? Like specifically, not just a display, but what are your thoughts on librarians promoting these books and just opening up conversations with people about these books?
I mean, my hope is because libraries, it's the only space where you have access to everything in one room, right? And it's not nearly as like segregated as a traditional bookstore. So in that sense, I think that finding the different books for the different readers is where I would ask for your help. And to kind of marry the person who loves Claire Cameron's work to say like, oh, hey, did you know about this?
Right.
And to help, and I'm hoping to facilitate some tools to help make that happen, by thinking about contemporary writers who can speak to the series. And then also, like, we're working now on teachers' guides and readers' guides to facilitate conversation. Online, there's a couple of community groups called like the Kanata Read-alongs.
Okay, that's good to know.
And I think they are meeting in libraries actually once a month to talk about each book. So they did Half Breed in July, and then they did Island in August, and now I think they're on Rue. So I mean, I think there are different like book club discussions happening, and I think that some people don't know exactly how to think about discovery. And so my hope too is that like this is where, you are the experts, right? So to say like, if someone who's interested in Indigenous literature but doesn't necessarily want a trauma-heavy narrative, or even nonfiction, but just wants like a really beautiful novel, that you could point them in the direction of Wagamese. And then by sort of having the familiarity of the series to say, this is just one of six. In fact, and what we're trying to do here is like broaden our understanding of what it means to live here, to live on this land, and to live side by side. And these books, this collection, is an entry point into how we can read about that shared experience.
Right. Totally makes sense. I love when things make sense. Right.
I do
That's
too.
great.
I do too. Yeah.
So what do you think it means to the next generation of readers? Like that's sort of where we're trying to head, right? So
Yeah.
we're heading in towards incorporating the generations into these books and getting them interested. And librarians will be the first ones to tell you that it's not an easy task to get, especially the teens, right? The teens are always something that we try to work really hard at getting into a series or even getting into a book. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. My hope is that the reader's guides will help with that and that the
Right.
designs will help with that. Because I think, I mean, certainly, like when I was in high school, I grew up with the New Canadian Library, which was discontinued when McClelland Stewart got bought by Random House. Um, I mean, it's a shame in a sense because I think that network and that access to schools was lost at that time, and now we're working really hard to like rebuild that a little bit. Um, as you know, we're trying. But I did note that the designs for the New Canadian Library and the content of some of those books, like it hadn't been updated in so long. And so for as like a teenager who loved books, it did feel like this is kind of it's out of date, it's out of style, it's not relevant to me. And my hope in the curation of this series is that I'm choosing books that are relevant to young readers, that will still be embraced by someone in their 40s or 60s or even 80s, whatever age, but that in fact really are the kind of essential reading for that reader from like grade 11 through university, and that
Yeah,
they,
we're hoping to be able to I think that's something that's really important. This generational um aspect to the books. And you're right, the covers are gorgeous, they're beautiful. The collection, it feels clean, it feels refreshing almost, right? Like it's beautiful. And I think the covers will appeal to them.
yeah,
Maybe, it's just a matter of like you say, presenting them, right? Sometimes it's just matter of, hey, did you see, or have you noticed, or even if the display is up, something like that. So
yeah,
let's hope that works. Let's hope
yeah.
the generations start reading these.
I mean, I think the aesthetics of the book go a really long way, a really long way. And the introductions, I think, will also help.
Yes.
All of the introductions are written by very familiar contemporary writers.
Yes.
So that should also move the needle a little bit just to earn some trust. Like if you pick up a short story collection that was published 30 years ago, I can see like a grade 12 student kind of eye rolling and being like, oh, do I have to? But then when you read Kate Beaton's introduction and she like talks about that community and the land and how, and like the fiddling around the McLeod house, like it changes your experience of the book. So I think that will also help a little bit.
I hope my local library will get a set so that I can go borrow them as well.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so when I have one other question here that I thought we could touch on. So you've been a strong advocate for the advancing reconciliation in publishing. Um, do you think is that gonna keep going? Are you thinking you're on a good path right now? You're heading towards the right way, and like this is the future of what we're looking at, right? This isn't something that's going to end all of a sudden. You're thinking this is going to keep going.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I mean, Kanata, if in my mind, this is the it's the new Canadian library for the next generation. So
Okay.
my hope is that over the next 10, 15, 20 years, we can in fact curate a list that is hundreds of titles deep that will be taught in high schools and universities across the country, that will be collected in living rooms because they are so beautiful. And all the spines will take up bookshelves. Like this is, for me, it's just the beginning, and we'll just keep growing. And, I'm asking a lot of questions too. So certainly like for the library community, like if you think, oh, we would love to see this, or can you send us your reader's guides? Anything that can be helpful or additive to make the series work in your space. Like I'm always here for feedback and dialogue around that.
That's wonderful. So we'll open up the platform to questions. Does anybody listening have questions for Stephanie? I think it's always important to include you guys. You're not just another pretty face. Actually, you're kind of just names to us, right? You're not really faces yet. But if anybody has a question, please put it in the chat, and we'll get to it. While we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions, let me see what else. So you talked about the inspiration. How did you and your team decide which books to like launch this series with? Like what was important to, besides, I mean, the theme that which you've touched is great. Was there something else that your team was like, okay, these are the ones that need to go in?
It was, I mean, Nishka for me was the starting place. And then thinking about there were, I mean, blind spots. So to get different people's perspective on geography and like regional representation, gender,
Right,
um, and like time, is this a historical? Is this contemporary? Are we exploring like how are we representing all the different possibilities? And of course, we're not because we can't. We can't possibly represent every potential lived experience in Canada in one series in one year. But over time, every year we will expand it more. So next year we've also got Austin Clark. We bring in Quebec with the tin flute. We're bringing in Billy Ray's poetry, the debut poetry. So it feels like, and Omar, of course, to really bring in the Middle East and his experience and
right.
challenge. Every year, my hope is that we will just add to that representation so that, it is actually a completely inclusive series. And so thinking about that's really very, very important to me. And then on the Indigenous front, thinking about books that haven't made it into the mainstream, but should. Uh,
Right. Haven't seen the light of day sort of thing, right?
yeah, yeah. And to marry them against books that will get people's attention, because otherwise, like if it was three unknown Indigenous writers, people would be less likely to engage. But if I include Billy Ray Belcourt, that's familiar. So then they'll turn to the shelf to see who's next to him.
Right.
So it's an interesting marriage of trying to find, early or, less known figures to bring them into the light, and then also making sure that we've got the advocate there who can help us to achieve that.
So
So
as you know, most libraries catalog their books by author. Um, you want to see the books next to each other on the shelf, don't you?
I do.
So that might be a little bit of a change in the way that libraries catalog their books. So just putting that out there for the ones that are listening, that it's important that you keep the books together, perhaps, and eventually have shelves and shelves of books in 10 years that we're hoping to explore this even more. I don't see any questions. I don't know if anybody else has any questions. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on, Stephanie, that maybe for the next year's collection? Is there a theme for next year's collection? Is there something that you absolutely want people to know about next year's collection?
I'm really excited about next year, and we've just finalized year 3 and year 4 too.
Oh,
Uh,
good.
I mean, next year is Austin Clark, The Origin of Waves, an absolutely beautiful narrative about two islanders who, left the Caribbean and immigrated to Canada in their days as young men, and then, parted ways and then end up running into each other at a bar and are walking through a blizzard in Toronto, kind of weaving through time, thinking about what they've left behind and what they've built here. Absolutely beautiful narrative.
Okay, sounds
And
good.
also, yeah, and then the tin flute, Gabrielle Roy, of course, like very
Mhm.
impoverished, woman in Montreal. That book could easily be about anyone trying to find a way to live in an expensive city right now. Like it just feels like it was written 80 years ago and it could be any one of us right now.
Right.
Which to me kind of speaks to the timelessness of it. And then Omar Al-Akkad, American War. And then on the Indigenous side, it's Billy Ray Belcourt's This Wound is a World, Richard Wagamese's Starlight, and again, Maria Campbell's Little Badger and the Fire Spirit, which is the traditional story of how humans found fire. And it's going to be like really beautifully illustrated by a young Métis artist as well.
Beautiful. I do have one question. So the reader's guides, will they be available on website or do we have to order them? Like how do we get the reader's guides? How can people get those?
I'm going to distribute them as soon as they're ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they'll be online.
Yes.
Okay. Somebody says, hello from Treaty One, Winnipeg. I was so happy when this series was announced. Thank you for sharing your stories and how this happened. So that's nice to hear.
Yeah.
So there's other people, and before we kind of close this off a little bit, I do want to make an announcement. We're officially launching a contest. So it's the Kanata Classics contest, reimagining the classics for a new generation. So this is open to all libraries, and we have 5 sets of books that we're giving away. And there's a small the contest. Well, let me just read this so I don't forget anything. So libraries across Canada are invited to take part by sharing their creative ideas for bringing Kanata Classics to life in their communities. So 5 winning libraries will each receive a fully stocked Kanata Classics display kit, complete with all the 6 titles, some displays, posters, bookmarks. The contest opens tomorrow, November 6th, and runs through November 20th. So there's plenty of time for it to submit your ideas. You can find the contest details by visiting whitehots.com. And we'll also be emailing all the full information to everyone who registered for today's webinar. So you should get that email sometime soon, and we can't wait to see your creativity shine. And who knows, maybe one of these libraries will be one of the winning libraries, which we would think that would be so fantastic.
Absolutely.
So all of that information will be available starting tomorrow morning. But again, anybody who's registered and everybody who's in the session right now, you will get an email sometime soon and I think isn't that a great idea? Like Stephanie, like just get this out to as many people as possible, as many libraries. Plus we get to hear what ideas they have, right? So it's always good to share ideas, and the library community is really the kind of community that loves to share. So we're hoping that'll be a good contest and that lots of librarians will apply.
I love that idea. Yeah.
Yeah,
I want to see everything too.
absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to keep you up to date. Is there anything else you'd like to finish off with? The floor is
No,
yours.
gratitude. Just to say, thank you so much for having me and inviting me in to talk a little bit about the series and what we're trying to do. It's really, I think it could be transformational, especially for young readers to really think about what it means to be Canadian. And for
I
me, it's a
agree.
question so many of us are asking this year, for, unfortunate reasons, but a question
Yes.
that also for many of us has been lifelong. So
So if I'm gonna leave you with this. If you had to pick a favorite out of the 6,
I can't do
that's like
it.
picking your favorite child. I understand, but
Yeah.
your top 2, let's say, if you can't pick just one.
Um, okay, I will say Nishka for me, this was a life-changing book for me. It was the first time
Okay.
I felt like speaking selfishly as just as like a personal reader, not as a publisher. This book, it was the first time I saw my own lived experience on the page. And I know there are hundreds of thousands of Indigenous people growing up in cities, very displaced from their communities. And we need more books like this and more people reading them in order for people to feel safe to begin to explore and find their way home. So I
I feel
will,
seen.
yeah, yeah. I'll
Okay, so
stick
we'll
with
go
Nishka.
with that one. That's the one I'm going to start then. I'll start that one when I start the series. Hopefully, I would like to read all 6 of them. It's a bit of not daunting, but it feels like it would be. I'd love to be able to read it with a book club. I think that would be really interesting to have that open discussion. So definitely we'll put the what you were talking about that meet on. I can't remember now the link that or the people you said that are already meeting or talking about it. Did you say it was a Facebook group?
Oh yeah, the Kanata read along.
Okay, Kanata read along. So we'll get a link to that, and we'll share that as well, just so that everybody has that. And it's something I will look up myself as well. So
Amazing.
thank you very much, Stephanie. We really appreciate the time. If anybody else has any questions, kind of now is the last chance. And if not, then we'll close this off. Just to let you know, everybody will get a recording of this webinar as well, and the link for the contest. And if anybody has questions for Stephanie, you can always email me. My email is tarand@whitehots.com, and I will get those questions to Stephanie and make sure that we get the conversation going with those questions as well. So thank you very much. I appreciate your spending time with us today. Thank
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.